For more on these latest developments in the Middle East, we turn to two specialists on the region. Ghassan Shebani, Assistant Professor of International Studies at Marymount Manhattan College, and in Washington, Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Gentlemen, thank you to both of you for joining us. Ghassan, let me start with you first of all. How much of a setback was the Israeli announcement today that it has approved the building of hundreds of new homes for Jews in disputed East Jerusalem?
Extremely unhelpful, because the Palestinians were hoping to start a good beginning with Biden's visit to the region. And every time it seems to me that we have some hope where we can start the peace process, the Israelis begin taking some steps and initiatives that are very unhelpful to the peace process. So it seems to me that the Palestinians are at this stage in a very, very critical situation to continue positively as they have wanted or wished.
Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I essentially agree that this is a complicating factor. The announcement of 1,600 new apartments in East Jerusalem is embarrassing to the vice president. But the Israelis would argue that their settlement freeze does not apply to Jerusalem. Thus, they're perfectly within their rights to announce this building. But in general, it violates the spirit of these upcoming proximity talks and makes the situation more difficult for the Palestinian Authority.
Did internal Israeli politics, Stephen, here lead to today's announcement?
Oh, I think without a doubt. It's no coincidence that the Interior Ministry announced this building today on the first day of Vice President Biden's visit. The Israeli government is divided. Prime Minister Netanyahu has to keep in mind his right flank. When he was Prime Minister in the 1990s, it was his right wing that brought him down. So this was essentially a shot across the bow of the Prime Minister as well as the President of the United States.
Ghassan, as you know, these talks are going to be indirect. They're not going to be face-to-face. So what needs to happen for Israelis and Palestinians to sit down at the same table? Do you think that that is going to happen given this latest obstacle?
It's going to take some time, but also Steve mentioned the 1,600 units in Jerusalem, which the roadmap was clearly stating that the roadmap said that even in East Jerusalem, the status quo ought to remain the same and no more settlements. But also Barak announced that 112 units will be built in Itar Elite, and that is a neighborhood in the West Bank. And when we say the West Bank, we are talking about the future Palestinian state. I believe that the Palestinians at this stage have been negotiating indirectly with Israel for the last probably 8 months. Considering that the roadmap and the Arab Peace Initiative are all on the table, I think the Palestinians are hoping that the Americans will press the Israelis hard or harder so they can move ahead with the peace process directly.
Stephen, do you have anything to say, just some of the points that Ghassan has raised there?
Well, I think that applying pressure on the Israelis is something that the administration has tried to do from almost its very beginning, and it backfired. In fact, President Obama had to walk back his demand that the Israelis stop settlement building everywhere. And Vice President Biden's visit to Israel is an effort to, as I say, show the Israelis some love. So I think although these are these announcements of building, whether it's in Beitar Elite or in East Jerusalem, are complicating factors, I think it's unlikely that the administration is going to come out very heavily and come down hard on the Israelis. I think they have to be happy that after a year of working diligently, George Mitchell has been able to bring the two parties together, albeit not in the same room, but nevertheless at least talking. So I don't think that I think if the Palestinians' expectation is that the administration is going to come down hard on the Israelis, they're going to be disappointed.
Ghassan, what's your response to that?
They can be disappointed, but we know that without the Palestinians being on the same page, there will not be a final and comprehensive peace process in the Middle East. So they can delay as much as they can. If the American strategy in the Middle East is to have a final and just and comprehensive peace agreement in the region, I believe the Palestinian demand ought to be met, or the Palestinian vision and desire ought to be met. So the Americans must move from managing the conflict to solving it. Otherwise, we will be, as Kissinger started in 1973, until now we will be just managing rather than solving the conflict.
And just very briefly, I'd like to find out from each of you, how much do you think is at stake here for the Obama administration? Stephen, briefly, why don't you go first?
Well, I think that the Obama administration has made it clear that resolving the Palestinian-Israeli problem is in its national security interest. But there's nobody in Washington who really gives it a tremendous chance that that's going to actually happen. So I think there's less at stake than one might think in these proximity talks, whether they succeed or fail.
Gassan, what are your thoughts? What's at stake here for the Obama administration?
Probably as far as re-election of the Obama administration, the stakes are not that high. But as far as a national security issue for the Americans, especially considering Iraq and Afghanistan, I believe the question of Palestine ought to be resolved, and solving it will help the administration solve other problems in the region.
All right, Stephen Cook, Gassan Shibani, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.